Okay, the last type of pure analysis we'll cover, at least in this somewhat arbitrary category of analysis, is at a higher and usually more strategic level. It's called gap analysis. A gap analysis, defined as abstractly as possible, seeks to identify the gaps in something. And that something can be a product offering or a business process or the skills of a team of employees, really almost anything in an organizational context. So, what kind of gap, you might ask? Well, usually it's the gap between how things are today, called the current state, and how things should be in the future, and they call that the future state. Sometimes gap analyses are performed as part of a project, and sometimes they are performed in the enterprise analysis space. Just from this definition, we can imagine how important gap analysis is to the business analysis profession. Understanding the current state of our organizations, defining the future state, and then charting the path necessary to get from here to there, all of that is inextricably tied up with enabling change, which we've emphasized over and over again as our core responsibility as business analysts. Generally speaking, gap analyses tend to be performed in steps, which I just alluded to a little bit. The first step is understanding the current state, where our organization or product or team or whatever, where we are today. The second step is defining where we want to be. And the third step consists of finding the best activities that will take us from our current state to the future state. And that's pretty much it. But don't think that this is necessarily so simple or so quick. I've seen enterprise level gap analyses take up to about 6 months or so to complete. And the one I'm thinking of was performed by very senior business analysts who knew what they were doing. But usually, as new BAs, we tend to work on smaller gap analyses. And we'll go through an example of one now. Let's use this sports beverage product launch as an example. And this is a very strategic example. Before starting the project to launch the sports beverage product line, our fictional company, XYZ, was just a manufacturer of sporting goods. We remember from an earlier lecture that they were also concerned about the vulnerability of their revenue base to economic cycles. In good times, they would make a lot of money, and in bad times, their revenues would drop substantially. They wanted to smooth out their revenues while also increasing the firm revenues. So let's take all that information and put it into a picture. Okay. Confession time, I cheated a little bit by making up some fictional current and future revenue targets, but that's fine for our purposes here. This is a great start for a gap analysis. We have our current state defined, at least partially, on the left side, and we have our desired future state, where we want to be, on the right side. What's missing is, how are we going to get there? How are we going to change our organization to get to the desired future state? We need to take some course of action or we'll never achieve what the organization needs. So let's flesh this out with some possible actions. Okay, there we go. Now, the most obvious question is, where are these possible courses of action? Where do they come from? They can come from lots of places. I like brainstorming them, personally. And when we're starting out with a clean with a clean slate, that can be a good way to start. But if you're doing a different type of gap analysis, say identifying the gaps between the current state of a system and the future state of that system, it might be a little bit more analytically driven. It depends on the situation. Whatever the case, after defining the possible courses of action, we see that we have the beginnings of a roadmap to get us from where we are today to where we want to be in the future. And from our previous discussion, we know that the management of the sporting goods company wants to launch a sports beverage product line, so that's one of the courses of action that they took. So this is a good example of a gap analysis, and I guess I lied earlier. This is an enterprise level gap analysis. I said we weren't going to do any enterprise business analysis, so I lied, and I'm sorry about that. I apologize. But regardless, gap analyses can be performed for just about anything in our world. At Seventh Morning, we spend a lot of time doing gap analyses and devising the list of courses that we want to develop. and that's a fairly long list. You can do them in planning out your career advancement as well. If you understand your strengths and weaknesses today, and you know where you want to be career-wise in 5 years or whatever, you can chart possible courses of action to get to that next step. For example, taking courses in business analysis. That's a great step. So, there is a high probability you're already doing it today. And that wraps up this first section on analysis. Please remember that we only covered a small set of methods that are most commonly used today, but there are countless others that you'll learn as you progress in your career. Let's move on to diagramming.